A federal judge on Friday partially blocked the Trump administration from enacting a policy that bans the use of X marker used by many non-binary people on passports as well as the changing of gender markers. U.S. District Judge Julia Kobach, who was appointed by President Joe Biden, sided with the American Civil Liberties Union's motion for a preliminary injunction, which stays the action while the lawsuit plays out. It requires the State Department to allow 6 transgender and non-binary people who are plaintiffs in the lawsuit to obtain passports with sex designations consistent with their gender identity. The executive order and the passport policy on their face classify passport applicants on the basis of sex and thus must be reviewed under intermediate judicial scrutiny, Kobach wrote. That standard requires the government to demonstrate that its actions are substantially related to an important governmental interest. The government has failed to meet this standard. Kobach also said plaintiffs have shown they would succeed in demonstrating that the new passport policy and executive order are based on irrational prejudice toward transgender Americans and therefore offend our nation's constitutional commitment to equal protection for all Americans. In addition, the plaintiffs have shown that they are likely to succeed on their claim that the passport policy is arbitrary and capricious, and that it was not adopted in compliance with the procedures required by the Paperwork Reduction Act and Administrative Procedure Act, she added. In an executive order signed in January, the president used a narrow definition of the sexes instead of a broader conception of gender. The order says a person is male or female and it rejects the idea that someone can transition from the sex assigned at birth to another gender. The framing is in line with many conservatives' views but at odds with major medical groups and policies under former President Joe Biden. The ACLU, which sued the Trump administration, said the new policy would effectively mean transgender, non-binary and intersex Americans could not get an accurate passport. This decision is a critical victory against discrimination and for equal justice under the law, said Lee Nolan Soul, senior staff attorney for the ACLU's LGBTQ and HIV project. But it's also a historic win in the fight against this administration's efforts to drive transgender people out of public life. The State Department's policy is a baseless barrier for transgender and intersex Americans and denies them the dignity we all deserve.